Greetings and welcome to another tutorial on advanced concept for the smart grid layout. In this tutorial, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can programmatically manage the number of rows in a given table structure. Remember, tables are structures allow you to do repetitive fields. If you have not followed the tutorial, I advise you to have a look at the repetitive field tutorial. I will put the link in the comments below, in the description section below. Now, here what I've done for this tutorial is I've created a very simple form, which basically asks a user how many language they know, and ideally to have some description of that language. But what I would like to do is, obviously, once these numbers are clicked here, automatically this table should fill up with those number of rows in order to be able to get the language skills for this particular submission. Similarly, it'd be nice, not to have the add row button, for example, not to be able to remove rows. So really to be able to control the table entirely using JavaScript events and code. So how to go about that? So going back to the form here, here's the HTML structure for this form. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually place a small paragraph. There was a question on one of the video tutorials by a comment asking how to actually add a paragraph within the form structure, and that's pretty straightforward. Let's say that I wanted to have a paragraph in between these two rows. What I would do is I would simply add a new row, but instead of adding a field here, I would now switch over to the HTML code of that row, and I would simply enter my paragraph with the line that I want. And what the plugin is going to do now is going to recognize that this row is filled in with custom code, custom HTML markup, and it'll simply convert this row into a text area where now you can pretty much freely edit whatever you want to do in this row. The advantage of this is that once I've updated this form and I look at the front end to see how it looks, it has the advantage that it inserts the text as is, because it's just HTML structure, and it's also neatly aligned with the other rows because this itself is a row. Okay, enough of that. Now, how do we go about customizing the front and controlling the events of adding rows and deleting rows and such? So to do this, you'll notice that there is the ability to add custom JavaScript for a particular form. So this JavaScript now is being saved in my theme folder. This is the theme that I'm currently using. It has created a subfolder called JavaScript JS, within which it has created a JavaScript file with the slug of my form, therefore uniquely identifying this JavaScript file as required to be loaded when this form is loaded. So what can I do here? You see that by default the JavaScript file is pre-configured with allowing you to use the $sign for the jQuery object. And as a result, there are many events and function that are pre-configured within the plugin for you to actually use and manage not only tables but form events and field events. And in later tutorials I will show you how, if you have additional functionality such as sliders or tabs, there would be extra buttons appearing here specifically for the function and the events associated with those structures in your form. So in this case, what we want to do is we first want to identify the actual table on which we're going to manage with our JavaScript. So to do this, I'm going to start off by creating a variable called table, which I'm going to keep on referring to in various parts of the code. So my table variable is going to hold the table object for the table we want to manipulate in the backend. Now, in order to identify the table, we need to make sure we have a unique ID that's pretty easy to identify. So here I've given this table construct an ID. You see this is the container. If you're not sure how to get there, you can reach out through this little shortcut here, and that gives you the location of your table. And here by default the plugin would insert a random ID that it requires an ID for the initialization of the table. But in this case, what I've done is I've changed this random ID into a language table. Makes it easier for me to understand in the code what's happening. So I'm going to copy this, because this is the ID that uniquely identified this table. And of course, here in case we have only a single table, that's pretty easy. But say you had a form with multiple tables, then it would be useful to actually be able to distinguish between different tables. Now, what I want to do is I want to actually load my table objects once the table is actually ready. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the event table ready. And when you click on this little link, it automatically inserts the code that you need to be able to get access to that table, right? So here I already have, within this little code, I already have a variable called table. I'm going to change this to T because I want to actually set it to this external variable which has a scope for the entire script here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that if $t.attributes ID is the specific ID of my table, which is I just copied from the HTML structure. So if the two are equal, then it means that this event is has been triggered by the table in which I want to manipulate. So in this case, this is where I'm going to do the subsequent part of my code, right? And what I'm going to do therefore is I'm going to set my table to $t. So now my table object that I define here is being instantiated. It's being loaded here at this point, and I can start doing something with my table. So what's the next thing that I want to do? Well, moving on here, the next thing I want to do is actually want to be able to trigger to be able to actually add rows here once this changes here. Once a user actually manipulates these radio buttons and selects either 3 languages or 4 languages, I want these rows to be automatically added. So what I need to do now is I need to detect an event change for this field here. And again, the plugin has a nice little shortcode here. In the form fields, we have an event for the value change of any field. Now, don't be alarmed by all the code that's now been added to your script. This is a small code that gets created in order to facilitate event change and for your given field. So once your form is set up properly, you will notice down here that this event is fired, and for any single field on your form that changes, this event will fire. And in the switch statement, you find your events with your field names which have been pre-configured. So the language known is simply this The language known is simply this this radio button. You see this radio button is called language known, which is the one I want to actually track. And then within this table, I have a text called language, and I've got a checkbox called language experience. And in this JavaScript event, you can see here the language known as this radio button, the radio field. This is the text field, and this language experience, the checkbox within the table. Now, you'll notice that there is a lot of code added prior to that. And this code, as is indicated in this comment here, is used to extract the field name within tabs and rows, within repetitive field structures. When a field within a table actually changes, the field name, depending on which row it is located, will not follow the same the simple name that you initially give it in your form. And I won't go into details as to why that is, but basically it's in order to differentiate the different fields on the different rows. And this little piece of code basically detects whether or not the current field which has triggered the event change is a tabbed or a row field, and in which case it goes through this little code in order to extract the original name for you to be able to then automatically determine what you want to do with that particular field. It also actually sets up a tab index and row index in case it's a tab or in case it's a table structure. So in this case, I remind you that what I want to do, I'm only interested in this event, in this field change, and I'm not really interested in these other two fields. So what I can easily do in order to actually make this little tutorial a little easier, I can simply delete this entire piece of code, because I'm not interested in changes in fields which are within my table. Okay, so I'm just simply going to delete this. Right, so what happens here is my field language known gets changed, and therefore this is here in this particular case, I want to actually start adding the number of rows that correspond to the selected radio button. So I have remember, I've set up my table here, so I can use that over here. And the way to add an actual row, you can see there's a function here which is to add a row. There you go. So I click on this, and what it does is it requires a table object, and then it calls a predefined function in the plugin for cloning the original row. So this clone row function basically adds your original row below the current row, right? But we want to call this repetitively as to the number of the number corresponding to the radio button that's been clicked. So if it's 4, then I need to actually add an extra 3 rows. This being the first row, I need to add an extra 3 rows to get a total of 4 rows. So in order to do this, I first need to know how many rows I currently have in the table. So to do this, let me delete these comments, these helper codes. To do this, I'm going to define my language number, languages, and this is going to be this field which has been triggered. So I need to copy this field object, and I need to get its value. That's the way you get the value of an input field within jQuery. And then I need to actually subtract the current number of rows which are within the table. So if I've got a single row or 2 rows, because someone clicked 2 but they meant to press 3, so when they click on 3 we just need to add an extra row and not 2 rows. So I need to actually find out how many rows I currently have in the table, and in order to do this, there is also a little function here which has got row count. So I click on row count, and you see it's added an extra function here called table. Table CSG count rows, and this is what I need here to subtract at this point. Now you'll notice that whenever I click on one of these events, it adds a lot of these little comments which are there as helper comments, but after a while you get the hang of it, and you don't really need these helper comments anymore. And there's a little checkbox here which allows you to switch off the comments. So if you just click on this, these comments will not appear anymore. So here I need to do a loop. And I'm going to loop through the number of rows that I need to add, or the number of languages that has been selected by the user. Oh, this has been added twice. I'm not sure why. Let me delete that. Okay, and every single time. So as we go through this loop, this table.cfg7 clone row is going to be called, and then an additional row is going to be added. So let's test this to see if it works. So if we reload our form now in the front end, the rows are not being added. Why is that? So I got a missing condition. That's probably why this is not being aligned properly. Yeah, over here. Now if I updates, yeah, that looks better. And now if I reload the form, there we go. So now as you can see, once I click on these radio buttons, the rows are actually being added. But if I was to come back again, you can see that the rows are not reducing. I've selected, if I'd selected say 5 by mistake, and actually it's supposed to be 4, I now have 5 rows that need to be filled in. So this is not quite what I would like. I would also like to be able to reduce the number of rows if there are too many that have been added. So in order to do this, I need to have a similar logic here, where I have another loop, and this time I'm going to say let's the row equal to 0, and if the row is now bigger than my languages, in other words, the languages here is going to become negative because I've got a value from the field which is smaller than the total number of row counts that I have, and therefore the row here 0 is going to be greater than this negative value. So I'm going to reduce the number of row in each loop until it matches with the languages. And here what I need to do now is I need to have a function to remove the last row, and this is going to loop through until the number of rows matches the required number of languages. So let's update this. Let's reload this, and let's do a refresh, full refresh. There we go. And now if I add 2 rows, it adds 2. If I jump to 4, I got 4 rows. And if I jump back to 2, you see now I've got only 2 rows. So this is a way to actually control the number of rows within the table. But you will notice that I still have this ability, the user has the ability to actually delete a row, which now actually spoils this synchronization between this number of languages known and the number of rows. Similarly, a user could potentially add new rows. So we really want to remove these 2 buttons. And again, there is a functionality for this within the JavaScript events that are provided. So for the add button, that's pretty straightforward. Once the table has been initialized over here, so we have the correct table, we've identified the correct table. Once the table is ready, I now need to simply disable the add button. So toggle add button, there's a function here to toggle it on and off, and I want to hide it, which is false, or I would set it to true if I wanted to actually show the add button. Now if I update this and I reload my form here, now you see my add button has disappeared. So I can now add rows or delete them, but I still have this delete button. And notice that the delete button is for each individual row. Whenever a row is deleted, then the next row also has a delete button. So what needs to be done for the delete button is to actually toggle the delete button once on every single row that is being added. So to do this, there is a row added event, and I am going to simply add it over here within this. Once I've identified the correct table, I'm going to add a row added event detection. So whenever a row is added, it is triggering a row added event onto the actual form, but it is being delegated. The event is being delegated to the form from the actual table. This is the table objects that delegates this row added onto the form. So in order to actually identify the specific table, I'm going to simply change this, which captures any table in the form, with the specific table in which I am interested to detect the add row events. So here we now have the event being fired whenever a new row is added. And what I can now do is I can simply use the delete toggle button function, which basically removes the delete button on the freshly added row. And because this table has already been configured here, I don't actually need it over here, so I can simply delete this entire row here, which just makes it a little cleaner when I am reading this code. So just to recap this, what I've done is I am binding a row added event onto the form, being delegated from the table in which I am observing over here, which I have identified. And whenever a new row is added, I am simply toggling the delete button off to false. So let's see if that works. Okay, so I add 2, 3, or 4 languages, realize that I can speak only 2, let's say, so I go back to 2, and there we go. And you've noticed that the delete button doesn't exist anymore. Even if I had 4 rows, there is no delete button for me to be able to click, nor is there an arrow button. So here you've seen how it is pretty straightforward to control the table structure using the JavaScript events that have been provided for you by the plugin. So I hope you found this useful, and in a subsequent tutorial, I will be looking at a similar logic with tab structures.